They say you couldn't touch him, that he was a phantom, a ghost who orchestrated an empire of crime under the very noses of the law. But behind the myth, behind the tailored suits and the cigar smoke, was a man named Al Capone. A man who rose from the Brooklyn slums to become the undisputed king of Chicago, leaving a trail of blood and whispers that still echo today. In the Roaring Twenties, while America danced to a new beat, Chicago danced to a different tune entirely. A tune played on the strings of fear, ambition, and prohibition. And at the heart of it all was a question that haunted the city: how did one man amass so much power? This is the story of the rise and fall of Al Capone, a story more gripping than any fiction, a story that proves even the most untouchable kings eventually meet their reckoning. But before the legend, there was a boy. A young man shaped by the unforgiving streets of New York, unknowingly stepping onto a path that would lead him to both unimaginable wealth and ultimate infamy. Alphonse Gabriel Capone was born in Brooklyn, New York, in 1899. Not into wealth or privilege, but into a large family of Italian immigrants striving for a better life. But the allure of the streets proved stronger than the classroom. By his teens, Capone was already entangled with local gangs, most notably the notorious 5 Points Gang. This was his proving ground, a brutal education in loyalty, violence, and the intricate web of the underworld. It was here he earned the nickname Scarface, a permanent reminder of a bar fight where his cheek was slashed. But New York, while fertile ground for a young hustler, wasn't big enough for Capone's burgeoning ambition. Opportunity, wrapped in the guise of illegal booze and unchecked corruption, beckoned from the Windy City. In the early 1920s, at the invitation of Frankie Yale, Capone moved to Chicago. Yale, a fellow Brooklynite, recognized Capone's raw talent for enforcement and saw him as a valuable asset in the burgeoning bootlegging trade. Chicago was a city ripe for the taking, fractured by gang rivalries and fueled by the insatiable thirst for illegal alcohol brought about by Prohibition. He started as a bouncer and a muscle man, quickly impressing the established boss, Johnny Torrio. Torrio, a shrewd and calculating operator, saw more in Capone than just brute force. He saw a sharp mind, a ruthless efficiency, and an uncanny ability to command respect, or rather, demand it. Prohibition had created a vacuum, a black market worth millions. And Capone, under Torrio's guidance, was learning how to exploit it, how to control the flow of liquor, and how to eliminate anyone who stood in their way. But the path to power in Chicago's underworld was paved with blood. Rival gangs, eager to carve out their own piece of the lucrative bootlegging pie, were constantly at war. And Al Capone was about to learn that in this brutal landscape, only the most ruthless would survive. What drastic event would propel him from a trusted enforcer to a man vying for the very top? The early 1920s in Chicago were marked by escalating gang violence. The Jenner brothers, Dean O'Banion's North Side Gang, they all wanted control. And Capone was right in the thick of it, proving his loyalty and his lethal efficiency time and time again. Johnny Torrio, though a master strategist, preferred to operate in the shadows, avoiding unnecessary bloodshed. But Capone was different. He was bolder, more confrontational, and willing to spill blood publicly to send a message. The assassination of Dean O'Banion in 1924, a move widely attributed to Torrio's South Side Gang, ignited a full-blown gang war. The North Side Gang, now led by Hemi Weiss, retaliated fiercely. In January 1925, Johnny Torrio was gunned down outside his home. He survived, but the attack shook him. The relentless violence and the constant threat to his life had taken their toll. Seeing the writing on the wall, Torrio made a decision that would forever alter the landscape of Chicago's underworld. He retired, handing over the reins of his vast empire to his protege, Al Capone. At just 26 years old, Al Capone was now the undisputed boss of the Chicago outfit. He inherited a criminal enterprise built on bootlegging, gambling, and prostitution, and he was determined to expand it, to consolidate his power, and to become untouchable. Capone established his headquarters at the Lexington Hotel, a fortress from where he orchestrated his operations. He surrounded himself with loyal and ruthless men, creating a formidable force that few dared to challenge. The authorities were aware of Capone's growing power, but fear, corruption, and the sheer scale of his operation made him seem almost immune to prosecution. But the violence was escalating, becoming more brazen, more public. And one horrific event would forever stain Capone's legacy and mark a turning point in his reign. What unspeakable act would finally capture the nation's attention and put Al Capone squarely in the crosshairs? By the late 1920s, Al Capone was living like royalty. He wore expensive suits, smoked Cuban cigars, and frequented the finest establishments. He was a celebrity in his own right, both feared and, in a strange way, admired for his audacity and his defiance of the law. His empire was built on satisfying the desires of a nation under Prohibition. His speakeasies flowed with illegal liquor, his gambling dens offered a thrill, and his influence stretched into every corner of Chicago's nightlife. But the gang wars continued. The North Side Gang, now led by the ruthless Bugs Moran, remained a persistent threat to Capone's dominance. The tension between the two factions was palpable, a powder keg waiting for a spark. On February 14, 1929, that spark ignited in the most brutal and shocking way imaginable. In what became known as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, 7 members of Bugs Moran's gang were gunned down in broad daylight. The perpetrators, disguised as police officers, vanished without a trace. The nation was horrified. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre was a turning point. It stripped away any remaining romanticism surrounding the gang wars and exposed the sheer brutality of Capone's regime. Public opinion turned decisively against him. Despite the public outcry, proving Capone's direct involvement in the massacre proved impossible. Witnesses were too scared to talk, evidence was scarce, and Capone maintained his innocence, often with a chilling smirk. He seemed untouchable, his power absolute. He had reached the peak of his power, controlling Chicago with an iron fist. Fear was his greatest weapon, and silence was his most effective shield. But even the most formidable empires are built on shaky foundations. What unseen cracks were beginning to form in Capone's seemingly impenetrable reign? The St. Valentine's Day Massacre had finally galvanized the authorities. President Herbert Hoover himself demanded action, ordering federal agents to bring Capone down. A team of dedicated agents, led by the incorruptible Eliot Ness, began to systematically dismantle Capone's bootlegging operations. They were relentless, earning the moniker the Untouchables for their refusal to be bribed or intimidated. Ness and his team raided breweries and distilleries, disrupting Capone's lucrative liquor trade and chipping away at his financial power. But directly linking Capone to these operations, let alone the murders, remained elusive. The pressure was mounting. Capone's carefully constructed wall of silence was beginning to crack. Some of his associates, facing mounting legal troubles, started to cooperate with the authorities. It wasn't the murders or the bootlegging that would ultimately bring Capone down. It was something far less glamorous, something he had seemingly overlooked: taxes. The federal government built a case against Capone for tax evasion, meticulously documenting his immense wealth and his failure to pay income tax on it. The trial captivated the nation. Despite his attempts at intimidation and bribery, the evidence against him was overwhelming. In 1931, Al Capone was found guilty of tax evasion and sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. His reign as the untouchable king of Chicago was over. He would spend time in various prisons, including the infamous Alcatraz. But the man who once controlled a city with an iron fist would never again wield the same power. His empire, built on violence and fear, had finally crumbled. But what lasting mark did this notorious figure leave on American culture? Today, the name Al Capone remains synonymous with organized crime. He has become a legendary figure, romanticized in movies and books, a symbol of a bygone era of lawlessness and excess. But behind the myth, we must remember the reality: a ruthless criminal responsible for countless deaths and the corruption of an entire city. His story serves as a chilling reminder of the seductive nature of power and the devastating consequences of unchecked ambition. The whispers of Al Capone may have faded from the Chicago streets, but the echoes of his reign continue to reverberate, a dark stain on the American landscape, forever etched in the annals of crime.